Hi, I'm Kathleen Murphy, and welcome to Murf and Unfiltered, Zero BS Biz Talk. Today we're going to be talking about work cultures. How's yours? And welcome, Elliot. This is Elliot Grossman, my host today.
Thanks, Murf.
And always.
Yeah, as always, right?
As
Good
always.
to see you.
Exactly. Nice to see you too. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's jump right in.
Yeah, so in researching this particular topic, although we've lived it, corporate cultures, work cultures, I thought it would be interesting to take a look and cite some of the stats that people have also researched about corporate cultures. So I'm going to name off a few here, and then I'm going to leave us hanging on the last one, which I think is almost one of those, oh my gosh moments, you've got to be kidding me.
Right.
But it's also something that people are really going to want to hear. So 67% of employees say that they are sometimes, very often burned out at work. 86% say that the lack of collaboration or ineffective communication is what causes workplace failures. Only 22% of employees strongly agree their leaders have a clear direction for their organization. And then the one that's the really oh my gosh, are people paying attention to this? The number one reason employees enjoy their work, emphasize enjoy, they feel genuinely appreciated at a company. So as we both know, culture really sets the tone for a company. And as companies are growing, they're not necessarily thinking about the culture of the company. They're not necessarily thinking, I really need a healthy culture to evolve my company and to, do that hockey stick that we all want to do when we're growing companies. So this isn't, it shouldn't be a surprise to people, but I found that interesting, let's just say. And what's your take on company culture?
Yeah, so it's an interesting take for me. I've worked in really difficult, and I don't like to say the word bad culture, but challenging cultures with companies, both young companies and also some companies that have been around for a while and maybe kind of forget where they came from and how they got there, and some really good companies. And my take is this: I don't need foosball tables. I don't need kegs of beer available all the time. I don't need a plethora of snacks. What I need to do is have good leadership that understands what's going on, where we're going, how we're getting there, why we're getting there, both on the sales and marketing side, as well as a clear direction where the company needs to be in the next year, 3 years, 5 years, and so on.
So why do you think that managers don't praise employees? If employees are looking to have somebody tell them that they're doing a good job, why don't they do that? Why don't they make them feel more appreciated?
Yeah, why do you think managers don't praise their employees? I think there's a number of things.
It doesn't cost them anything.
No, it doesn't cost them anything. Well, it does, right? It does cost them anything.
In the long run, it actually does.
Yeah, sure it does. It costs them really good employees many times because people leave companies because of culture.
Absolutely.
Many times.
Yes.
I think leaders or managers tend to be out of touch, right? They tend to be out of touch with really what's happening with their team because they get so caught up, and we've both been in this situation. If you recall, we were at a company together. We had so many meetings scheduled all the time.
We could do a whole show on meetings.
And
Monday how to actually have micro meetings instead of 8 to 10 hour days worth.
That's correct. And so there was so many meetings scheduled that I know for a fact I was not able to get out on the road or get out with my team, do my one-on-ones that I would normally do on a weekly basis to really get a good understanding and a clear picture of what's happening with the team.
Absolutely. And that comes down to communication.
Of course it does.
And not necessarily having the ability to communicate with your team and to provide direction and leadership because you're sitting in a meeting.
Because you're sitting
listening.
In a meeting. Yeah. So.
And then arguably, did anything actually come as a result from having had that meeting? Could that meeting have not taken place and you would have been in the same place in terms of looking at your statistics for your numbers, in terms of how well you performed that day or week or month?
Absolutely. I think another part of that, and that kind of segues into The managers don't have a solid understanding of the business, what's happening. I don't care if you're in marketing or in product management or in operations or on the sales team. They don't have a clear understanding of what's happening in the business because they've lost sight of really where all the work gets done with their team.
With their team.
Right? With the nuts and bolts on what's going on with their team and how things are really moving forward to the challenges that they're facing.
Right.
You've seen it. Would you agree?
I would completely agree with that. And so one of the things that I think is really critical is developing the spirit of collaboration and communicating effectively. And that, that can go both ways. The leadership team needs to communicate down throughout the organization, and then the people doing the work, everyone else, needs to also be able to communicate back up what's going on and what's happening, and is the leadership communication and direction being given to them working? And that's a huge part of the corporate culture, is whether the communication is working or not. And that's one of the factors that contributes, in addition to not praising the employees and giving them, atta girls and guys, the lack or ineffective communication. And that's such a shame. And I want to restate the statistic of 86% of employees say that the lack of collaboration or ineffective communication is what causes workplace failures, _failures.
Failures, right.
So if you're starting a company or running a company and you hear that statistic, you should be fairly alarmed. And you should be thinking, oh my gosh, am I part of that statistic, or is my company in that same situation? And so I'm sure that, if they are, they may not in fact be aware of it, which is actually even more dangerous.
I think it is more dangerous, but I do think that that's really the main point with many companies. The leadership teams are often so busy. So if you're in a CEO and a CRO level, you're a very high level within a company. Whether you're a public company, what are you trying to do? You want to make sure that everything is moving forward and looks good for your next...
for Wall Street.
For Wall Street. Got to look good for your next reporting call to Wall Street.
That's right.
So that's part of it. And you're always concerned about that because your shareholders, you've got to make them aware of what's happening. You've got to make the board of directors aware of what's happening.
That's right.
The second part of that comes down to, so then you lose sight of really what's happening in your team. And you have this management team in place because you trust them and you want them to be able to do what you're doing. But we go back to, you've got 19 meetings a day, and you lose sight of that management team. So all of a sudden, that communication that you think you're building your company on is forgotten.
So it goes back to that statistic that only 22% of employees strongly agree their leaders have a clear direction for their organization. Now, I'm not a math wizard, but that really isn't a great statistic. And I would be quite alarmed if I heard that was the case at my company. And this is another statistic that is part of what shapes the culture, which is the direction or lack thereof direction. And I'm going to get into citing some examples from companies that have done that exceptionally well. One of them was a company that we worked at together, and I'll get into talking a little bit about that particular statistic because I think it's extremely relevant to this conversation.
Right.
And then the other comment and statistic that we were talking about earlier was the burnout factor. Given the fact that a culture is not healthy, it's going to burn employees out that much faster. So if you think about the contributions to what's happening in terms of getting that person to that point of burnout, that is something that definitely companies need to take a look at as well.
Yeah, so think about that for a second, right, Murf? Let's back out of the numbers. So now we're talking about 78% of employees strongly agree that the leaders really have no direction, or that they're doing well.
Seemingly.
At
I'm
least
not saying from their perspective.
Right. So I'm going to let you respond to this. Think about that. If only 22% of employees strongly agree that the leaders have a clear direction for the company, or a clear direction of where things are going and what the culture should be. I mean, give me your take on that. It's crazy.
It is crazy. And so I think that people tend to sometimes at companies be afraid of over-communicating.
So let me stop you. Mm-hmm. With your company,
yes.
Market Me Too, we're going to get a little hashtag Market Me Too, right? How do you help with adjusting that culture? Walk us through that.
That's a great question. So typically it starts at the top. I go in, I'm talking to the C-level executives, starting at the CEO level, and finding out about how they think that they're communicating with their leadership team, and then how is their leadership team communicating the results of what it is that the direction that they're going in to the rest of the company is playing out. And I ask them a series of questions to establish whether in fact that communication is flowing the way that it should, or if in fact that it's just perceived that it's that way. So I'll then go down to the next layer of management. I'll go to middle management. I'll ask some of the same questions. And then I go down to the layer underneath that where, we might call people the worker bees, mm-hmm. where the work is definitely getting done. And I'll have a general sense after meeting with I'll break it into those three layers of people at the company, whether in fact that the company is effectively communicating and whether the leadership is there that's setting the tone for their direction. And if it isn't, it's going to be very clear to me what I need to then do to come in to help them. And so I have a series of techniques that I'll take them through without giving any trade secrets away,
of course not.
That are incredibly impactful and effective in a very short period of time. It doesn't take a lot. People think that it may take just months and they've got to hire giant firms out there that they spend tens of thousands of dollars a day on. Major consulting firms that aren't getting the work done. Let's face that. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I point out to them also is a basic element, and that's that moods are contagious. And those moods start from the top. So when you walk into a company, the tone is being set from the upper leadership that day, mm-hmm. based on the tone of the CEO or the upper management staff. I can't tell you how many companies I've walked into in the morning where people are talking about, so how's so-and-so's mood today? Because that's setting the tone for the rest of the day. And guess what? That enormously impacts their culture. And not in a good way if that person's in a bad mood and doesn't realize it.
It's not even a bad mood, right? It's the tone and how they respond and how they communicate, goes back to that word communicate,
yes.
with their employees.
That's right.
So I've been at companies where senior level management would literally walk right by my office or walk by my desk every day, wouldn't say good morning, right? I'm an early riser,
sure.
I'd be in there early. They'd never say good morning. They'd go in their office, the next thing I know, my phone would, rather than walk back down the hall and say, hey, how you doing? Good morning. I happen to notice this. I was reviewing these numbers last night or going through things. This is more on the sales side. What's happening, what's going on, as opposed to just walking by and you're like, oh boy, here we go again.
Well,
right?
Precisely. And there was this one CEO that I really appreciated what he did. It was really kind of fun and playful. He had one of those sort of hoverboard-like devices, mm-hmm. and it happened to serve him well because he had been injured, so he sort of needed it to get around.
Okay.
But he would scoot around on this, and he made a point of every day, different times of the day, it wasn't a set agenda. He would pop by to every single department and just start talking randomly to people and asking them how they were doing.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Oh, imagine that. Wow, what a concept. Actually being human and talking to people and say, hey, I know you had a baby, Murf. How's your baby doing? How are you, getting along? How are things? Any of those things go a long way in changing the culture and continue to communicate and getting to know your employees and understanding where they're coming from and really what they're up to, not just here at work, the burnout factor,
precisely,
but also in real life.
Right.
No one wants to, I have walked around on eggshells in many companies.
Sure.
No one wants to do that.
No.
It's not a good way to be, well, because people start looking.
Right.
Start looking around, it's time to leave, and
yes.
it's not a good way to be.
That contributes enormously to attrition, mm-hmm. company attrition. And
right.
if you look at some of the stats these days in terms of length of typical employment, depending on what industry you're in, it's actually relatively short, and so much shorter than the generation that our parents came from. I mean, they couldn't imagine living in the era that we're in right now, where we're changing jobs every 2 to 5 years. Without even thinking about it.
Right, of course.
Whatsoever.
And the culture of, wait a second, you've got fruit snacks and fresh fruit and fresh coffee.
They didn't have any of that.
And they bring in dogs to, if you're having a bad day, let's bring in the dogs.
Oh, I know a company that does that.
Right, of
Absolutely.
course. It's a nice gesture.
Puppy patting day.
Puppy patting day. Make you feel good. Okay, I got my fix.
That's right.
Now I'm going to be much more productive because I got to say hi to Fido, right?
Exactly.
But let me ask you this.
Yes.
Why do so many companies struggle with developing culture and engaging and motivating employees?
So that's a great question. And I think it comes down to the fact that they're not appreciating their employees. They don't give their employees an opportunity to really showcase who they are. They don't give them opportunities to develop and focus in on the strengths that they have to contribute to the company in their particular role and then beyond their role. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't take a lot. That doesn't take an army of firms out there that you're going to tee up for, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to tell you how to go about doing that. Mm-hmm. There are tactics that you can use. I'm a Gallup strengths coach, so I'll use the tactic of figuring out what people's top 5 strengths are. Start there. Very basic. It costs $20 per person to go about doing that. I mean, what company can't afford to invest $20 per person to find out what each of their employees' top 5 strengths are? I think that they'd be hard-pressed to say that they couldn't afford to do that, because that's a huge contributing factor to motivating their employees. Because when the employer appreciates the employees' given talents and strengths that they've hired them for, and then empowers them and provides praise to them and provides communication back to them in terms of where they're going and direction, whether it be for their career path or for that particular company in terms of the direction that they're going in from a growth perspective, that's a game changer for resetting culture.
Motivational, such an incredibly motivating opportunity.
It absolutely is.
Okay, so here are your top 5 strengths.
Yes.
On the flip side, you might need some work with this. We want to help you. We care about you. We want you to be here long term. We're going to make you better. We're going to work together to be better. What a great way for a manager to kind of gain some trust and respect from their teams.
Absolutely. I've heard, and I haven't confirmed this, but I'm pretty sure if I confirmed it a second time through another person, that I love this story, that Facebook is a Gallup Strengths organization. And they'll have people come in and take their top 5 strength survey to find out what they are. And if they find out that there isn't good alignment for the position that they teed that person up for, guess what? They move them into a different position so that they're better aligned. Imagine working in a situation like that. I think someone would almost fall off their chair if they found out that, you're going to put me into a position that's going to be better suited towards the talents that I have to bring to your company. I mean, talk about...
Incredible, right?
Right?
Incredible. We talked about this, I believe, in episode 3 or episode 4, where we talked about moving somebody that maybe we hired and they seemed right at the time into a sales role or a senior sales role. And we realized it wasn't right for them, and we could tell you they were, I think we were on the same team at the time, and that they were kind of spiraling downward.
Yes.
Yet when we talked to them and did a one-on-one and really got to kind of get a feel for what they really wanted, and were able to move them into a sales operations or a sales account management situation where they thrived.
Yes.
Of course.
It does
it seems like such common sense, doesn't it?
It really does. And so in terms of, I talked earlier about giving some examples of companies that have done an amazing job at developing company culture. There's one company, Black Duck Software, that got bought by Synopsys that did something very unusual from my perspective. I hadn't seen this before at other companies. They hired somebody to be responsible for their corporate culture. His job was to figure out how to help the CEO and the rest of the team leadership team to make it an amazing place to work every day. And yes, they had the beer taps and the snacks, and they'd bring in the cookie truck for snack time sometimes in the afternoon and do all kinds of things, but they went way beyond that. We did all kinds of things like having Waffle Wednesdays. We gave back to the community by doing all kinds of volunteering activities. We used to just have these made-up holidays that we would celebrate people and, activities just for the sake of getting everybody's spirits up. And let me tell you, that developed an incredible culture. Another example of amazing culture was at a company that we both worked at, which was Constant Contact. And one of the things that sticks out of my mind the most in terms of, for me, thinking about almost dismissing everything that I just mentioned in terms of what Black Duck was doing in terms of offering beer taps and cookies and volunteer opportunities, was something quite different. And although Black Duck did this, they did town hall meetings. They did that very effectively to keep everybody informed. But Constant Contact was a publicly traded company. And what they did, and I'll never forget the first time that Gail Goodman, the CEO of the company, said this. She said, we're in a position right now where I'm going to be sharing incredibly time-sensitive and incredibly private information that if this got out onto the street, got out publicly, it could negatively impact our stock, our company, and our forward-looking progress. But I'm going to trust, because I trust the employees at this company, to not say anything about the information I'm going to share with you.
I remember it clear as day.
I could not believe that. And she said, I will continue to do this until somebody proves me, otherwise, that there's a leak in the system. I was blown away by that. That just was absolutely incredible. And I don't know about you, but I mean, if that doesn't set the tone for a culture, I don't know what does in terms of excellent, amazing culture.
Of course, because now all of a sudden, wait, you've entrusted me with super high level information?
Yes.
Well, I'm only down here, Gail.
But
that makes me feel.
It makes you feel, exactly.
So
yes.
important
and empowered
to who I am at this company and what my role may be and how it might impact that serious information, that high level stuff.
That's right.
It was such a great, I remember it clear as day. I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you. So as we're winding down here, and I'm just sort of reflecting back on what we were talking about today, and I'm wondering, seeing companies and whether they can turn around their corporate culture and whether that's possible. Just a quick take on whether you think that is possible.
Yeah,
and I'll give you my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll be brief. I absolutely think it's possible. However, it starts from, again, we talk about this, looking in the mirror.
Yes.
And saying, if I'm the CEO of this company, if I'm the president, if I'm the executive vice president, I need to take a look. First, what am I doing? And secondly, how is this affecting my team?
Exactly.
So I do think, I've seen it from good and bad, but I can see it absolutely. I think a change can be made. And like you talked about with Gallup and a lot of other things, doesn't cost millions and millions of dollars. No, it can be done by looking in the mirror and then working with your team and communicating better.
Exactly. So my take, very briefly, is that absolutely, yes. 100%, companies can turn their company culture around. And I think company cultures ebb and flow, so they go through periods of highs and lows, but you really, to be an excellent company, you want to keep them somewhere in the middle. That's my take. So as we're winding down here, I want to thank you today for being my co-host, and I'm really excited about the up and coming other shows that we have to that we have in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with incredible, fascinating topics that we'll be covering. So this has been a great show. And
episode 6 in the books.
That's right. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
I hope
Murf.
everyone enjoys this.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.